Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining wherever you are. We perhaps will have a chance to, you will have a chance to introduce yourself later on, but for the moment, please, if you can put in the chat box your name, your organization, and the country you are from, just so we get a sense who is sitting in the room. Some of you we know, but some others we don't. So please do. And welcome to this workshop today, which is part of our online course, Subordination and Discrimination in Global Supply Chains. And today we're very pleased to have with us Professor Martina Sproll from the Berlin School of Economics and Law. And together we are going to really engage with some of the questions of how the different forms of inequalities facing workers in global supply chains affect labor organizing strategies. And that's what we hope will have you all involved after Martina makes a short input of about 10 to 15 minutes on the topic, and then we open up for conversation. At the moment, we're not too many, so you could all take the floor, but please make sure you prepare your questions and make sure they are to the point, and they end with a question mark, so we have real questions. So thank you very much, Martina, for making time for this, even if you're not feeling very well. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Elvira, and welcome everybody. I'm really happy to meet you for this seminar. And well, I would like to, as Elvira said, like to give an input to build some context and background for our discussion. But the question of why do we need an intersectional lens for thinking of organizing strategies is something I would really like to discuss then with you later on, okay? So let me see if I can, okay, I hope you see the full screen now of the presentation, right?
Yes.
Yeah, great. I will start directly. So why do we need such a feminist intersectional lens for our own strategies? I start with an example. Esther Boserup, she was a Danish economist. In 1970, published a book with the title Women's Role in Economic Development. That doesn't seem so groundbreaking, but it was, because she found out that not men, but women were the workers in agriculture in African countries. And why is that groundbreaking? I think for most of you it will be familiar. It was because development aid was given to men, because the Western politicians usually assumed that it was men being the breadwinner and not women. Yeah? They expected women not to be the producers, but the reproducers in the families. What we can learn from such an example is that there is a male bias, a really huge male bias in theory, all kind of theory and disciplines. This is not only true for social sciences, but also for the natural sciences. Yeah. But these male biases also reflect in political practice. And so we can find that too in our own organizations, in the trade unions. And maybe just think of your own organizations. Are there any women in leadership? Did that change more recently? And what is the situation where you come from, right? So we focus on global value chains, and this debate, or also the empirical phenomenon, started around the same time when Esther Boserup published that book. It is in the 60s and especially 1970s, when there was a deep crisis in the global north, the crisis of Fordism. For the first time after World War II, there was a big recession, so increase of unemployment, and the employers started to think of internationalization strategies. And that time, from side of some researchers, that was called a new international division of labor, where we had a massive relocation of labor-intensive mass production to the global south. And the interesting point is that in these new world market factories, in Latin America and in Africa, and especially in Asia, the new workforce in these world market factories were young women. And it was a starting point for a worldwide increase of the female labor force participation. And we can nowadays see that in some regions, the majority of the workers are female. I try to introduce a little bit the concept of global value chains, well, the first concepts have been provided by Wallerstein and Hopkins, two scholars coming from the tradition of the world systems approach. And I will give or read this very famous quote here. What we mean by such chains is the following. Take any ultimate consumable item and trace back the set of inputs that culminated in this item. The prior transformations, the raw materials, the transportation mechanisms, the labor input into each of the material processes, the food inputs into the labor. This linked set of processes we call a commodity chain. Why do I present you this quote? I mean, it's quite clear that for production, we need raw materials. If it is a value chain, it's a spatial process where we have transportation and so on and diverse inputs. But what is interesting in this quote is that labor was mentioned explicitly. Yeah? Hopkins and Wallerstein were aware that for any kind of production, we also need the workers, we need labor, yeah, and the food inputs into the labor. So the workers also need to reproduce themselves, and usually the main work linked to this reproduction is done by women. So it was a very progressive and comprehensive idea of global commodity chains, including the reproduction of labor force. And there were more interesting points in that publication of Wallerstein and Hopkins, 4 points that are interesting to presented here. They said that inherent characteristics of such global commodity chains is, firstly, the intermingling of several forms of waged and non-waged, of free and unfree labor. Yeah? For example, I think you all know that in recent times we see an increase in modern forms of slave labor. A second point they mention is the extraction of visible and hidden surpluses from households. So the part of reproduction is not paid usually when it's done in the families, in the households, and predominantly by women, but this is extracted and appropriated by the companies in the global value chains. The third point, they said it always goes along with a gendered and a racial exploitation of workers. And the fourth one is the economic devaluation of household-based work, because this is also part of global value chains and part of the phenomenon of informality we have within these chains as a structural element, okay? So I think that was already clear in the 1970s when we also had the start of a really long-standing tradition of feminist research on gender relations in global value chains. And there was, meanwhile, a further elaboration of concepts. After commodity chains, we had global value chains and global production networks and so on, a very lively, interesting debate. But the problem is that inequalities, gender, intersectionality are still blind spots in these theories. We can see that especially in the mainstream, but even critical approaches did not systematically include these questions into the approaches and the academic debate. Yeah. At the same time, we could see that there is still, there has always been and still is a gender division of labor, a job segregation, where we have the stereotyping of women with their nimble fingers and the docile habitus doing emotional work and being more easily to be exploited. You know? So we can see that women are especially vulnerable in global value chains. due to their position in households where they're responsible for reproduction, many of them single mothers, they do not have the same access to land and credit, they're subject of sexual harassment, etc. So this is not to say that precarious working and living conditions would be something limited to women. No, we see that precarious low-wage jobs in general are, well, the norm in global value chains. So it applies to men and to women. And here we can see there's quite a change in gender relations going on in some parts where men do have such a low wage that they cannot be the male breadwinner anymore, right? Or have never been. It depends a little bit on where we look at. So coming back to the question of social reproduction and the household. So again, the question of wages. We see that in big parts in global value chains, the workers do not earn their living. It is not a living wage. It is a very low wage. And so this is one point I want to highlight here. I think that the conditions of reproduction are very important to understand the conditions for us to organize workers. Yeah, this is something which usually is not really taken into consideration. And if we look at the household not just as a unit for reproduction, but also for production, then also it comes into sight that we have very diverse forms of employment, of work. We have paid and unpaid, we have formal, but we also have many, many informal arrangements within the global value chains. And what is important to me now is to say that we cannot just look at it as global value chains, so the companies make use of that, of informal, unpaid, reproductive work as hidden input of value, as was said before, but the companies also produce actively these informal economy structures. So they build and produce and reproduce social inequalities. And that is something we have to take into account. So the last slide I would like to present is that if we start from that and to see that social inequality is an inherent part of these value chains, we see that workers are affected differently from exploitation. And we can at the same time see that fragmentation of workers, that is a consequence of that, is not only produced or happening through subcontracting and outsourcing. That, of course, is a very important moment. But we also have to see that there are other categories of social inequalities that produce that cleavages and separation and so on, a differentiation of the workforce. And so we have, for example, class and caste that matters. Gender is not a homogeneous category. Women and men are formal or informal or undocumented workers, but we also have qualified workers, entrepreneurs, or even managers. And we also have to see their belonging to race, ethnicity. We have to see where they come from. So migration plays a role, and religion. And these categories are linked to colonial legacies, where we have inequalities, huge asymmetries in the world economy that reflect inequalities and the fragmentation of workers in that sense. So that is what I wanted to share with you at the moment. And if you do not have direct questions, I would like to continue with some questions now and hope that we can get into an active discussion. You can, of course, use the chat, but I think it would be even better if you just speak out loudly and use your microphone and so on. Yeah. So the question for me is a little bit, if you look at these categories, in how far do you have any experience? What role does that play in your own trade union or the NGO, wherever you come from, in your own contexts? And in how far do these categories reflect in organizing strategies? Do you already have made any experience, or do you have any ideas with regard? So, of course, you can also ask questions on what I presented, but that would be my suggestion to start a discussion right now. Yeah. I stop the presentation, maybe. Yeah. I mean, just think a little bit of the situation you're coming from. If you're a member of a trade union, who is the leadership of the trade union? Who are the workers the trade union represents? In how far has gender or migration been a concept you have been talking about or reflecting for, well, in your attempt to organize workers, for example? Well, what are your personal thoughts with regard to that? Nobody? We can.
We have somebody. It's not Hien, but people are using Hien's link to get in. So please, whoever raised the hand, we don't know the name, but do say, ideally, please turn the camera on so we can see and take the floor and tell us who you are. So the person who raised the hands, do you want to say something? Perhaps, Martina, well, people are thinking if you could give us an example of a labor strategy where whether that's successful because it's considering all these fragmentations or unsuccessful because it fails to consider these transformations. I think either way, these are important examples. So could you perhaps illustrate that with an example where we see the importance of considering or not considering these categories?
Yes, of course. I could try to start with some ideas or examples of that. For example, if we look into the textile and garment industry in southern India, it's quite an interesting place to look, or example to look at Bangalore, because there are new organizing attempts. It's very difficult for trade unions to organize workers anyway there. The problem are the really low wages, and the problem is informality, and also the hard struggles, because where workers started to strike and to fight for organizing the workers, sometimes the companies just close down the factories and go elsewhere, open it up again in the periphery or something like that. Yeah. So it is very interesting to see that in these examples, it is especially women who are organizing, who are fighting, who go on fights. But so it is not at all the situation that we should think of women as just being passive or being the victims, not at all. Yeah. But for the trade union, it was then clear that if they want to reach out to the workers, there's two things that are very important. Firstly, we cannot just have a bureaucratic apparatus of a trade union. We have to go to the shop floor. We have to talk to the workers themselves. We have to organize the workers on the shop floor. And as they are very often informal workers, we have to go to where they live. because not always we can find the workers at the workplace, right? So that's a very important point, I think. If we want to organize precarious and informal workers, we have to have an idea of what is their background, their condition of reproduction, and we have to maybe find a way to community organizing, yeah, and send the organizers to where the workers live. Yeah, that would be one idea, and we could see very successful examples of that in Bangalore, but also elsewhere. Yeah, so yeah, maybe that as one example, not to talk too long.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we know that the person that was trying to talk under Hien's name is Uja. I will not try to read the rest of the name. So Uja, would you like to take the floor? Or if somebody else would like to take the floor, please feel free. Yes, Benji.
Hello. Just to respond to Martina's question earlier about experiences about organizing and using the intersectional lens, I would just like to relate an experience because I'm not really an organizer, but I do help mostly in education with labor organizers. And one time this was an effort organizing workers in the export zones in the Philippines. So in this particular factory, they were doing electronics. And I came to the meeting and I asked the usual question, what is your workplace issue? Half expecting that they'll answer low wages or the usual. And to my surprise, they said, well, our issue is that the management took out the door to the women's comfort room. And of course, I was surprised. I asked them, can you explain a bit more? Apparently, management was suspecting workers that they're taking too long in the restroom, and so management took out the door. And I guess 90% of the people in the meeting were young female workers, and yeah, that was their actually main issue. They went on to form a union, went on strike, mainly led by female workers. I say that, and but I think many unions in the Philippines are aware, but in terms of actual practice, integrating gender issues, there's still a lot to be done. Recently, for example, I asked labor organizers, and they said, well, they did an informal survey. They said that half of the women that they talked to were suffering from UTI, and that was because of the high production quota, so women cannot go to the comfort room when they needed to. Okay. Although in my experience, even these issues are usually framed not as gender but as labor issues. So issues of production quota, okay, they'll campaign among workers concerning high production quotas, but probably with not enough stress on how to relate it to specific women concerns or as a labor and gender issue. So I don't know if that's the case in other countries, and if just as you mentioned, there are like positive experiences elsewhere integrating these issues. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Benjamin, for this example. From my own experience, I can tell you that these are things that happen everywhere in the world. Yeah? I have witnessed a lot of struggles around such questions. In Brazil, I have I've been part of a protest where the workers saw that there were cameras in the toilets, and so yeah, and I have been part of a struggle for call center workers who did not have the chance to go to the toilet at all, yeah, with the consequence of health issues, infections that were the consequence of not going to the toilet in time, and so on. And so this is, I think, very important starting point for labor struggles, where especially women are being involved. And of course, if there is any observation of women at the toilet, this is also part of sexual exploitation, of sexual violence and sexual harassment. And that is something we can see everywhere too. And it's very, very worrying, I think, because in the last years, we see that that violence against women is increasing tremendously. Yeah? This is something we see since the pandemic, where the number of killed women has increased so much everywhere. And this is something which is not restricted to the workplace, but especially happening in private households. So very often it is the partners of the women killing them. And so this is, of course, another point where we can see that violence is something which we also have to understand from a gender perspective. Yeah? Although violence is something, I think, a very common daily experience at the workplaces themselves. No?
Yeah, and in some cases, we have seen trade unions taking even the question of domestic violence as part of their labor agenda. For instance, we know examples of trade unions in Australia negotiating special clauses in cases of domestic violence, workers facing domestic violence, and then arranging for relocation of these workers if that was needed, or whatever was needed from the worker, to try and make sure that they could somehow address or help in that process of gender violence. But I will try to unmute Uja, because it's having a problem. It's trying to talk, but we can't hear. So Uja, I'm just unmuting you now. And I don't know whether you can turn the camera on. If so, it would be great. I am trying to unmute, but it's not working. There must be something wrong with your connection. Yeah, no, it's not working. Sorry, Uja, why don't you type your question in the box, in the chat box, and then we will read it, and then meanwhile we can continue with perhaps other questions or comments on what Martina has put forward to us.
Maybe meanwhile, another example on what Benjamin brought in. I did research in the electronics industry in Mexico some years ago, and there was a really big problem with overtime. So without any previous announcement, the managers wanted the women to stay and to work longer. And they had a big problem because they could not reach out to their husbands to inform them. But when they came late home without any announcement and permission of their husbands, there was a big problem then also regarding the reaction of the husbands. And the women were very worried about that. So that was a very big problem and pressure on the women, right?
Nico, would you like to say something?
Also, maybe to contribute to the debate and show sometimes the challenges to implement an intersectional perspective from the union's point of view. Well, some of us, we know each other. I live in and I come and I'm a unionist in Argentina. And where the gender movement has been very interesting and successful, mainly in putting the gender agenda in the labor world, typically a world dominated by men, unionist men. Nevertheless, and this is the little piece to contribute to the difficulties, we recently, well, last year or maybe more than 12 months ago, we organized a workshop on race and ethnicity to show that for the case of Argentina, while gender has been part of the agenda, race and ethnicity was not at the core of the agenda. And it was very interesting how the debate was essentially between a racialized man and a powerful white unionist, and how that the very nature of this sense showed that the combination of intersectionality is sometimes hard to implement, because you may have strong female voices, but they're white or mainly white, or you have racialized voices, but they're mainly men. And when you look to show the importance of the intersectionality, how they combine class, gender, and race, it becomes such a complex process that people end up by not understanding why that is important. So ultimately, and this is the challenge, it becomes a problem of academics or very sophisticated unionists. And ultimately, it goes either or one way, one section of the triangle of what we understand by intersectionality, that is the combination of the three levels of oppression. And ultimately, it has become very difficult for us, at least in the way we are situated in Argentina. Because the good thing is that the female movement has done a lot, but it mainly represents urban, unionized, white women. And again, when you pull from one corner of the triangle, the other two becomes a bit weak. And well, it's part of the debate, and I'm curious if this happens and how it happens in other parts of the world, because as far as I am concerned, for instance, in Brazil, racial issues are very, very important, or they are addressed with a robust discourse and laws and actions. But ultimately, Marielle Franco, this very important activist, was killed because of being a racialized woman. So again, is part of the debate on how intersectionality, while it addressed very correctly, which is the nature of the problem of multiple dominations, it still is difficult to implement it in a balanced way, in a balanced criteria. And it has been very much in the core of my action as a unionist, how to teach, how to create aware race consciousness on the relevance. And given the results of the election in Argentina that showed that the far right still has a lot of terrain to gain, my question is if intersectionality is not a claim like of a second generation of claims that we dream of, but we are still at the very grassroots level of or a first generation level of claims. It's a bit of a comment, and maybe I'm curious if this is somehow similar in other regions, whether intersectionality is a strong debate or it's a bit in the margins. And to finalize, the starting point is that class has been very important, but we have not achieved properly gender and race. And well, this is my comment, and thank you so much, Martina, for your interesting and clear and useful presentation. We need tools, we need materials to go to the street and make this a public debate and not just a sophisticated interaction between experts.
Yeah, I agree, Nicolas. This is a very, very important contribution from your side, I think. I can react to it, but maybe somebody else would like to come in. I still want to say something on that, Nicolas, but maybe somebody else also has to say something or has an opinion of what Nicolas said. Well, while you think about it, shall I go on, Lira? Yeah. So I think you point your finger to the wound. That's really a problem that we allowed to be so fragmented in the labor movement, right? So first of all, if we look at the global north and the origins of trade unions, these were male white organizations, and they did not even allow women to be part of. Yeah, so women could not become a member of a trade union. They had to fight for it, and they did it because the feminist movement fighted for that. Yeah, so so from the very beginning, it was quite a male organization and a male movement. It is absolutely clear that the workers are not white and male overall, and that there is well, every color and gender and so on also part of us. And I think you said something which I found very important. You talked about multiple domination, yeah. And I think that is why we need an intersectional lens, because otherwise we could not really envisage and see that multiplicity of domination. That's what I try to address in my presentation as these different dimensions of social inequality. And these are not just add-ons. We do have class, and then we have to add gender, and we have to add race or something like that. No, we have to acknowledge that all these dominations, dimensions and the social inequality dimensions are a structural part of exploitation. Yeah? And so I think you're right, we are just at the beginning of such debates still, but we need to make a step forward in order to be able to address these challenges you're talking about. Of course, that is exactly the problem. There's the cleavages. Then the racialized men do not talk with the white women because these belong to another, well, class, I would say, that is seen as the dominator and not as, well, another part of the working class in solidarity. And maybe this is something we have to take seriously, because there is racism and there is sexism, not just outside, but also within the labor movement. Yeah, we find all these prejudices, these stereotypes, these devaluation of the other, the othering per se. We find that in our own organizations. So I think we will not be able to make a step further if we do not reflect on that. Yeah. So firstly, but that does not mean that we have to highlight and hype the diverse identities all the time. Yeah, I think that is happening at the moment. We have so the cleavages are getting bigger and bigger because everybody is trying to identify him or herself as being part of a specific community. Yeah. And this is also not helpful. Maybe it is helpful to understand how I am affected by any kind of discrimination, right? And I have to understand that as a Black woman, I'm not affected in the same way as a white woman or a Black man. Yeah. So there are these differences, right? But at the same time, we have to build, well, solidarity and approaches which try to incorporate these cleavages in their strategies. And that's why I'm here, because I think that's really a very important issue for us to become more aware and to start thinking of how can we overcome such cleavages without saying everybody is the same. No, yeah, there is a lot of difference between us. We are not affected in the same way by discrimination, yeah. But it is part of domination strategies, as Nicolas said. And so, first of all, I think we should try to deconstruct these domination strategies and see what is behind, huh? And then we would maybe find a common ground for a common struggle that is not exclusive to one or another group. Yeah. There's a lot in the chat, and I had no possibility to read it.
Yeah, we are going to go to that. So we have Uja from Nigeria that is saying, going forward, there is a need to measure gender equality to include participation, experience, responsibility, acceptance, decision-making, and so on. And this will balance the sensitivity of the concept, especially in workplace, without prejudice to any gender. Then we have also Mabisi from Uganda's Hotel Food Tourism Supermarket and Allied Workers Unions. And it's making reference to the example of women workers in Chinese companies where they're actually told not to get pregnant. And if they do get pregnant, then they would lose their jobs. And at the same time, Chinese don't recognize union, and what should we do is the question. So perhaps shall I read them, Martina, and perhaps you try and respond, or what do you think? Or do you want to engage one by one?
Maybe you just read out the others. It's not too much,
yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm.
And Nico added, and there is powerful, poor, radicalized women, or so to say, she gets co-opted from some form of bureaucracy, NGO work, academia. The question is how to democratize and expand the debate on intersectionality. Very good questions. In my opinion, says Hung, I think Hung was from Vietnam, if I remember correctly. I see that most local NGOs in Vietnam commit to the gender equality in job description, every position. So I think that most staff perceived of existing. Something is missing perhaps there, perhaps the sentence is continuing. But I think that they're very fair points to perhaps engage a bit more in depth here with the concept of intersectionality. And I think we wanted to have this discussion a bit of intersectionality and identity politics and how that somehow, has worked to be more divisive in some instances rather than solidarity. And I mean, I just came across this author that has written a book that apparently is very famous in bringing the history of the term identity politics. And he said it really goes back to the 70s, where you had a group of a collective actually of women. Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's him. I'm not sure, but that he it was a collective of queer Black socialist women who said how important it is to start from the particular situation in which anyone finds themselves in terms of this domination structure, and that you work from there to build solidarity with other groups that are also dominated and exploitive. So it wasn't about creating this group that stays separately vertically, but actually you almost then start to connect to people with that share that different forms of domination and exploitation. And Martina, if you could speak a bit more to that, also in the light of what Nico was saying, in terms of the new feminist movements that are emerging, that somehow are not really seeing their way to work closer with the labor movement, and the labor movements, vice versa, not being very open to actually work with them. And how does that conversation really leads us to the broader discussion of class, and how do we define class in our times, or how it should have been defined always?
Yeah, thank you very much also for the comments in the chat. I don't know if I will be able to respond to that all at once, maybe just some first points, and then we can go on. I would like to start with the last comment by Hung about the NGOs, because I think that's quite interesting. If I understand your comment correctly, Hung, then you say, okay, there is sort of a political correctness or something like that. Everybody claims, okay, we need to include more women in leadership, and in NGOs this is being done. Yeah. I mean, this was a result of, I think, decades of struggle in the feminist movement to say, no, we need the women being represented in leadership anywhere. in companies, in politics, in social movements, and so on. And we see that there have been a lot of struggles also in trade unions about that. So the Trade Union Confederation in Brazil, for example, there was a very, very intensive struggle and a quite successful solution for the representation of women in the leadership in the trade unions. And this was really a beautiful struggle and something very successful. But we see that it's there is this deep debate and sort of a bureaucratic implementation everywhere, and we see the counter movements. Yeah, we see the far right and the populist right and so on working against. Yeah, now trying to unmake the success of feminist movement regarding language, regarding representation, and so on. And so this is under attack actually at the moment, very, very strongly. And we can see that this at the same time is an attack on democracy, right? And so there is, of course, always this intimate link to the question of democracy here, right? But what I want to say is that even if there's, for example, NGOs who voluntarily, and because they were convinced that they have to combat gender inequality, they change something in their organizational structure. But NGOs very often are also a problem. Why? Why do you say that? Maybe this is not very, how can I say, a much shared viewpoint or something like that, because usually my argument is that we need coalitions between trade unions and NGOs and so on, and social movements. But very often the NGOs do something instead of the workers. Yeah? They're implementing something from top down. And I think if we want to change something in the sense Nicolas problematized, we really need to have bottom-up approaches. Yeah, we need the organizing at the shop floor. We need to involve the workers themselves. And that's, I think, how they can make experiences, not just of exploitation and of a difficult living situation or anything, but also how they can work together to improve the situation for everybody. Yeah, I think otherwise that will not be possible. If we have an NGO sort of as a party for the or a representative for the migrants, another one for the women, I think it will become difficult. This is not to say that NGOs would not have a very important and needed role in such a process, yeah? But it cannot be that top-down approach, right? And so if it's just a formal procedure to have women in leadership, but it's something which is not lived in an organization, it will not be a success in the end, right? And so that's, I think, one point that seems very important to me. Then the example from, was it in Nigeria, where the Chinese corporations are acting, right? So I think that's a very interesting example, and we very often see something like that, that the transnational corporations, well, not only the Chinese ones, right? They are not respecting labor law and workers' rights and decent work and so on in the country where they are investing. Yeah, and well, I think there are different levels to try to confront such a behavior of companies. First of all, it is always necessary that the workers organize and fight there. Yeah, but we can build coalitions. Yeah. We can build coalitions with workers, for example, from other companies who have a trade union, or we can try to build coalitions with political parties. This is also a level where I think we always have to think of the legal regulation of what is happening. So we need to look not only at industrial policy, but we also need to look at migration policies. We need to look at family policies and so on, because social regulation is also something which will not work only from top down, but we need social regulation. That is, I think, a target we have to achieve. It's not just to have a singular success somewhere, but we need to have rules and regulations, social regulations, being institutionalized so they can become a right. Yeah. And it's very hard to imagine the situation of these workers. And it's a very interesting example that it's Chinese companies trying to forbid their workers to become pregnant. This is so absurd. And it's, no words actually, right? And we can see again that all these attacks on workers and the limitation of their rights and of the this is not even labor, this is human right? So it's an absurd thing, and we should build coalitions in order to denounce such a behavior of the companies and make aware what is happening there and so on. Yeah, so that's all I can say, because I think we really need the workers there, and we need networks of trade unions around. I think Nigeria is a country where there are some interesting experiences regarding such coalitions, especially in mining, and there the Chinese companies play a role again, but also in other sectors where we have a lot of informal workers. We know that it is so difficult to form unions with informal workers. And in some African countries, there were some experiences where the trade unions that exist in formal sectors reach out to the informal sectors, so they can help give information, maybe give political education, give some help. And so their institution can also help elsewhere where it's less or not institutionalized yet at all. Yeah. So we need to be very creative and flexible in finding such kind of strategies. Yeah. Okay. Now, what else?
There are quite a few comments in the chat box. Some are just about how bad the situation is, like the example in Zimbabwe of women in terms of their discrimination, and especially lack of services at work. And of course, the question always becomes, what can the trade unions do? And I think also the question before from Ujai is also related again. What can you do, especially in the cases where there is really like very strong hostility from the employers and the government to organize? But this is also a question that pertains more broadly to worker organizing, so not particularly on gender. And then in Zimbabwe, it's just about how, what I mentioned, and there was in Uganda. I think perhaps we missed something.
Yeah, what Mary wrote, and about the sanitary pads and so on. I think this is a very interesting point, because we can see that what is linked to gender and sexuality is very often something which is linked to feelings of shame, and it's there's a lot of taboo around that still. Huh? We live in the 21st century, and this is still a taboo to talk about menstruation of women, right? But this is something which is a reality. And in like in the example before, where the women are being filmed in the toilet or cannot go to the toilet because they don't get a break and things like that. And if they have their menstruation, they need to go. And of course, men also need to go. Yeah, but so this is a human need, and a human need that is denied by employers. Yeah? That's a shame. So and very clearly, it is important to break the silence about these issues. Yeah? And that is also a way to bring gender in, to say, okay, we have also physical needs, yeah, that need to be addressed, and they differ maybe according to gender. Yeah, or they differ between people who have a stronger health and others who do not have such a strong health. Yeah, so this is, of course, not a divide between men and women. Yeah, that's what I think is important to know, that we need to find politics which much more meet the needs of everybody, right? Okay, and maybe again to what Nicola said before. Now there's another one. Yeah, we have a radical libertarian right, and I'm very worried also with what happens to the feminist movement in Argentina, right? Because what you said is important to know, that in Argentina there was such a strong women's movement, and a very successful one. I think experiences that are unseen in the world, right? Even so, very important. And this is also directing into reproductive rights, so the right to abortion, for example, or contraception, and all these issues. But I think the feminist movement in Argentina also was able to introduce a lot of politics that strengthened the role of women in the households. There were a lot of programs that supported domestic workers, women with care responsibilities, and so on. Find programs to combine these responsibilities with employment in the formal sector, and so on. Yeah, I think the problem is that now the economic situation smashed it all away, and now we have this radical, this crazy type, libertarian. Yeah, but well, let's see what kind of politics he will be doing, but I'm sure that he will attack these achieved rights. Yeah, yeah, that's a big problem. Let's see what he will actually do in reality, because at the moment we only know what he's claiming and what he's saying, but not what he's actually doing. Yeah, this is still up to a reality check then later on. But also in that case, we will need solidarity also in the labor movement from all the different parts, because it is men, it is women, it's migrants, and so on, who are affected. Yeah, and we cannot allow that Argentinians say, okay, if the Bolivians are sent away, no problem. Yeah, because it is a problem not just for the Bolivians being sent away, but also for the others. Yeah. We have to understand that this is not a politics just for somebody else who is different from me. Yeah, it is a politics that we need in order to achieve an improvement, or at least to save rights that have been achieved somehow. Yeah. And so we are in a very difficult political moment, not just because violence and wars is exploding everywhere in the world, yeah? But also because we have this threat from the extreme right, yeah? And they are very directly negating any right of migrants, of women, and so on. Yeah, so we need to unite in order to fight against them. And the problem is, and I saw that when Milei was elected in Argentina, and there were some interviews with people on the street saying why they voted for Milei, and I was very sad because it was so visible, and I could feel really that the people did it because they were desperate. Yeah, they were desperate because they do not see a perspective on their own survival. And that is a situation we have everywhere in the world. So these are the issues we should organize together and try to unite. But we cannot build these movements without accepting that we are not all the same. Yeah. And so that, I think, is the important point. Yeah?
Nico, would you like to say something?
A very short comment to complement and to why this situation in Argentina is relevant for the topic of this workshop. In my understanding, intersectionality is a sophisticated claim, a very important but sophisticated claim. And why even working class voters and citizens are voting the far right, which is not just in Argentina. We just went through a similar process in Brazil where Bolsonaro lost the election with a very little margin, and we know that Trump is still a possibility in the US and elsewhere, India. There are many other situations, so it's not just about Argentina. In my understanding, we progressive forces are failing to connect with the perspective of people in the ground. That's why the Global Labor University process is very important. We are trying to democratize the language of rights and make them relevant. In my understanding, intersectionality, I mean, Millet blames about intersectionality. He's speaking 19th century language. So we are going backwards so sharply that talking about about intersectionality in the case of Argentina, I mean, we will resist. The movement gender is very well organized, and they will give combat, and we will support, and we will be there in the streets, but we anticipate violence. So also the problem is about strategy, how we can address the phenomenon of the far right and how they blame about intersectionality. Should we recalibrate the strategy? Should we go back to the very basic demands of the working class? The particularity of Argentina, and explains Millet, is the economy of Argentina, which is a complete failure. And this was not the case of Brazil. It was not the case necessarily the case of the US, etc., etc. So again, there are particularities. But to focus on my comment, we need to democratize, to make intersectionality meaningful for a larger amount of population. As I see it now, it's a sophisticated jargon for specialists. And this is my concern. I'm very much in favor of intersectionality. But I personally feel, for instance, that I have failed for the case of Argentina, in properly integrating the debate of race in this triangle where gender and class are solid. And again, this is like a technical debate on how we accommodate different struggles. And also we are pushed on the from the political correctness on the one side and the far right on the other side. Because not long ago, we were critical on how NGOs were performing intersectionality. We labeled them as neoliberals. And we need to understand that the difference between a neoliberal and a libertarian is enormous. Is the difference between a democratic right and fascism. And we are assisting to the emergence or the re-emergence of fascism in many countries, not just in Argentina. I hope I was clear, and I don't want to go beyond that. We'll continue this conversation, and everybody is welcome to struggle in Argentina because we will need international support, believe me.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that intervention. Martina, I don't know, would you have some concluding remarks that you would like to say in light of so many different questions and comments that came, which shows actually how important it is to take this topic in a more systematic fashion. So over to you.
Yeah, I will try. So thanks again, Nicolas. I think that's interesting that a guy like Millet talks about intersectionality, right? And on the one hand, you're right, it's sort of well, a specific discourse or somehow sophisticated, but not from its origin, where it was coined by a lawyer, Kimberly Crenshaw, who participated in a law case where it was a labor court in the U.S. And it was a black auto worker, a female black auto worker, and she observed the process going on at court, and she became aware that the situation would have been completely different if it would have been a white worker and a male worker. Yeah, and that the treatment of that person was different because she was a worker, because she was black, and because she was a woman. Yeah, that was the starting point, and that's an important insight, first of all. Yeah, but I think I would like to come back to what I said some time before. I think for thinking of strategies, of course, there is, well, facing all these problems in the world, there's not an easy recipe, yeah, very clearly. But I think that we have to rethink and to focus very, very much on organizing strategies which start at where the workers are. We need to organize workers in a way that they become aware of their own situation, that they become aware of solidarity, and become aware of some type of empowerment by doing so. Yeah? And I think these strategies necessarily mean, they should not include, but they mean that we respect the specific situation of female workers and of migrant workers and so on. Yeah. That can only be part of the struggle if we involve the workers themselves. May they come where they come from and be where they are, but so they are different. But we need to start from their own experience. Yeah? That is, I think, a very, very important point, because that's what I tried to explain, or a point I wanted to make when talking about the NGOs. Very often we can see that the NGOs start to negotiate on international level instead of the workers. Yeah? And this is not a progress in the end, but it means that the workers on the shop floor level and the local trade unions will be depotentialized. They lose power. They don't gain power by such strategies. And that's so why, again, I think we need to start from the very specific and concrete local experience of workers. Yeah? And then I think there is a chance to mobilize them. Yeah? I think that's a chance to not just leave them with discourses from the malaise in the world, yeah? But to have another a starting point for taking responsibility for our own lives. Yeah, so we need that at that level, and it is not possible to just jump to another one. So this scale jumping will not work. Yeah, and I think that's the starting point where we also can see that we need to take into consideration what is not just Robert Cox called it the spaces of engagement and the spaces of dependence. So the spaces of dependence would be something where we can try to understand what are the restrictions and the constraints in the daily lives of us, of everybody, of all the workers. Yeah, and we need to start from there. Yeah, that's my claim.
Well, thank you very much, Martina. Really, thanks for this conversation. Also to everyone with questions and comments which are relevant to your particular context. So our solidarity goes with Argentinian people, of course, but also to all the people that are fighting, whether in Zimbabwe or Uganda or Nigeria, the comrades that we had here.